Madagascar first became heavily involved in the pet trade in chameleons in the late 1980s, according to CITES export data. By the 1990s, export figures had grown, reaching more than 60,000 chameleons at its peak in 1998. This caused Madagascar to become one of the world's most prolific exporters of chameleons, destined for homes predominantly in North America, Europe, and East Asia. It wasn't only the legal trade that experienced rapid growth during this period. The number of chameleons being illegally harvested grew swiftly too. The trade in chameleons continues today, although the legal numbers of exports have declined to just over 14,500 chameleons a year. But the clandestine illegal trade means the number of wild chameleons captured in Madagascar for the pet trade is difficult to quantify and subject to debate. What is not in doubt, however, is that many chameleon species are under severe threat. Experts say that the pet trade and the thriving illegal trade in particular is putting these reptiles at greater risk.
Madagascar est important pour les caméléons parce que actuellement Madagascar abrite presque la moitié des caméléons dans le monde. Les principales menaces pour les caméléons Madagascar sont groupées en trois grands groupes. Premièrement, il y a la destruction de leurs habitats, qui est la grande menace pour les caméléons. Le changement climatique, qui est surtout menacé les espèces de haute montagne. Et ensuite, il y a la collecte pour le commerce international, parce qu'il y a certaines espèces qui est fortement collectées.
CITES, the body that regulates the international trade in flora and fauna, was sufficiently concerned about the trade in chameleons from Madagascar that in 1995 it suspended trade of all but 4 species. In 2014, it withdrew the trade suspension and other select species of chameleons entered the international market legally under CITES regulations. Jean, not his real name, is one participant in the chameleon black market. He supplements his income as a wildlife guide by illegally collecting chameleons from Mongabay National Park, a protected area in northwest Madagascar. Jean agreed to speak to Mongabay about how he entered the chameleon trade in 2014 on the condition of anonymity.
Zay zay nisy le client zay navideto zay bourgeois raiky sinoa raiky angeli raiky proposé-nay andeha mibariky nagnambara reo fa zay tsy andeha volaindreo fa atsika mafaka amborigny koa misy koragna atsika hely ka koragna voalohany nalatsany bourgeois lahy zegny taminay zegny zay mila tarondro 200 pièces zegny amezanareo zay nagnambara avoaboakanay zay volainay fa arakaraka fagnaragna atsika fo zay zay nagnano zay 100 000 zay isaka tarondro zay. The
panther chameleons Jean was collecting, like all species of chameleon found in Madagascar, are endemic to the country. They are one of the most popular chameleons in the pet trade. Prized for their stunning iridescent colour forms, they sell for between $150 and $600 each. That's up to 240 times what Jean and other collectors like him in Madagascar are paid to legally or illegally collect from the wild. This disparity in income between the collector and the end seller is a common source of criticism of the legal trade.
Le commerce peut aider à la conservation des espèces et à leur habitat s'il y a vraiment une transparence sur les avantages, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a un partage un peu équitable sur les avantages.
Despite local collectors earning relatively little, some, like Jean, continue to capture chameleons when they have few financial alternatives.
Antony nangalako izy, orako ndraiky izy za mavozo, za tsy koty nangala izy fa vozoako fa le tsy fanagnana, zay antony nangalagna izy. Akory mataonao tsisy feky aminao, tsy mety le raha io feky raha parapegny mamboaka vola, zay antony nangalana izy.
The impact of chameleons being illegally collected on a large scale to supply the pet trade could potentially be serious for certain species of chameleons, according to Christopher Anderson, chair of the IUCN's Chameleon Specialist Group.
So if the illegal trade in chameleons is as high as some studies have shown, which is 10 to 100 times that of the legal trade levels, that could be extremely concerning for Madagascar's wild chameleon species. There's a number of species that are highly localized and range restricted, and that would be in particular troubling for those species, as it would have a very large impact on local populations, which constitute the entire distribution of the species.
Preventing the illegal trade is not simple in a country consistently ranked amongst the world's poorest and most corrupt. Enforcement is further complicated by the similarity of many chameleon species to one another, as Anderson explains.
So enforcing protections on chameleons in Madagascar is complicated for a number of different reasons. One of those is there's a number of very cryptic species in Madagascar that are difficult to differentiate between other species. And when some of those species are endangered or threatened, it makes it so that you could easily come into a situation where by simply not being able to differentiate between those species, you could inadvertently export a threatened species in place of a species that can legally be exported. And so education and training is a major issue for implementing a lot of these protections in Madagascar.
Some animal protection groups have called for a complete ban on the commercial trade in wild-caught chameleons. They cite not only unsustainable harvesting practices, but also animal welfare issues. One of the most common criticisms in this respect is the high mortality rate among chameleons during the collection and transportation process. However, animal welfare issues are not limited to collection and transportation.
Chameleons in general are also delicate captives, and so chameleons oftentimes are fairly short-lived species, although there's exceptions to that, but they also tend to be prone to stress related to improper husbandry and improper care, which tends to be a little bit more difficult to achieve appropriately than many other reptile species. And that has effects on the long-term survival of individuals that are imported to the pet trade.
In theory, captive breeding could help reduce the deaths and the pressure on wild populations to supply the demand. But many species of chameleons are not consistently successfully bred in captivity. Without improvements in the pet trade and conservation of chameleons' habitats, the long-term fate of many species of chameleons hangs in the balance.